Chapter 9. Promptly at 10 a.m. Monday morning, a knock sounded at the entrance. After quickly checking her appearance in a mirror and tucking a stray strand of brown hair in place, Laurel Wycliffe hastened to open the door. Harry Potter stood outside. He was dressed in a plain, light gray suit and carrying a small box. "Hello, Mr. Potter," said Laurel, backing away to let him enter. "Won't you come in?" "Thank you, Mrs. Wycliffe," said Harry, stepping inside. "I brought you some cookies," he said, holding out the box. "They're oatmeal raisin. Jenny baked them. I hope you like them." "She didn't have to do that," said Laurel, taking the box, "but we always love cookies." She opened the box and peeked inside. "These smell wonderful," Laurel added. "Do thank her for me." Harry Potter nodded solemnly. "I will," he said. Jenny would be glad to hear Laurel was pleased. When she learned Harry would be seeing Laurel, Jenny wanted to bake some cookies for him to take along. Laurel had baked them some holiday cookies last year, and Jenny wanted to return the favor. Unfortunately, Jenny had never baked cookies before, at least not without using some magic in the process, and Jenny didn't think cookies made with magic would be appropriate. Harry offered to bake the cookies, as he was the only one in the family who had actually cooked without using magic. He'd done it for the Dursleys often enough. But Jenny insisted she do it. Baking cookies without magic was easier said than done. It required a trip to a Muggle library to find and select a cookie recipe. There had been too many cookie recipes from which to choose, so they finally decided to use one recommended by Hermione. It was a recipe for a cookie that she liked, and her mother mixed and baked regularly. With recipe in hand, the family visited a Muggle store to get the ingredients. Lily was fascinated with how food items had to be lifted and carried to the shopping basket rather than just flying there on their own. They had to get other supplies related to food preparation too, such as pot holders and measuring spoons. Creature never bothered with those things when he cooked. Lily did most of the actual mixing. She thought making Muggle cookies was a wonderful activity. She was still too young to practice magic. They did cheat a bit with the oven. Theirs didn't have a proper Muggle thermostat, so they had to bewitch it to maintain a steady temperature. It took 3 batches of cookies, however, before Jenny was finally satisfied that the final product looked good enough to give away. Creature insisted they leave the resulting mess in the kitchen for him to clean up. He had grumbled the whole time they were in the kitchen, maintaining that cooking was his responsibility, not theirs. Harry followed Laurel into the kitchen and watched as she put the cookies away. The radio was blaring in the background. "Repeat, 4-year-old Megan Fielding has been found alive," it said. "Megan apparently escaped from her kidnappers last week and has been hiding in the woods ever since." Harry's head turned and he looked over at the radio, listening. Laurel switched off the radio. "It's kind of nice to hear some good news for once," she said conversationally to Mr. Potter. "What?" said Harry absently. His attention seemed still on the radio, even though it was off. "The news," explained Laurel, getting out a tray already filled with biscuits and sliced apples, "about that little girl. Usually child kidnapping stories turn out all wrong. The kidnapped child gets killed or is never seen again. But this time, the little girl got to go home." "Oh," said Harry. He still looked distracted, as if thinking of something else. "Won't you please sit down?" Laurel asked, offering him a chair. She set the tray with food down on the table. It seemed awkward to move back into the living room. She returned to the stove to pour the hot water for the tea. "Oh, yes," he replied absently. "Thanks." Harry sat down and reached for a biscuit to eat. "She found her," he said abruptly. Laurel put down the tea kettle and looked at Harry in surprise. "What?" "Holly. She found that little girl Megan." "What?" Holly was at school when she noticed one too many emotions. She traced the extra emotion to its source, and it was Megan. Laurel pulled out a chair and sat down across from Harry and stared at him. "Are you serious?" "Quite," replied Harry soberly. He put down his half-eaten biscuit and explained further. Megan had somehow been transformed into a grasshopper. The ministry is still looking into how that happened. But the grasshopper was at Hogwarts. It was Holly who recognized the grasshopper wasn't really a grasshopper, he continued. Megan doesn't remember any of that, of course, he added. The ministry modified her memories and took her back to the area she was last believed to have been. "Well, why didn't anyone tell?" Laurel stopped. Of course, nobody told them anything about it. Harry was Holly's legal guardian while Holly was at Hogwarts. Any and all magical matters concerning Holly were brought to him. Dylan had been afraid an owl might arrive unexpectedly and would alert his parents about someone going to Hogwarts. I am telling you, Harry corrected calmly. We're all very proud of Holly, and I thought you should know. No one else at Hogwarts is an empath. If Holly hadn't been there when it happened, well, somewhere tonight, a happy little girl and two parents are very lucky that Holly was attending Hogwarts, he concluded. Laurel poured out the tea and handed a cup to Harry while she considered this. That brings us to the reason why I asked you here. Harry stiffened a bit while he took a sip of his tea, but he said nothing. Laurel poured herself a cup of tea before continuing. Just how safe is this Hogwarts place? What do you mean? Asked Harry carefully, putting down his cup. He took another bite of his biscuit, all the while watching Laurel with his green eyes. Well, last year, after what happened, whatever it was, began Laurel, Dylan went on a rampage and swore that that school nearly killed you and it would surely be the death of Holly were he to allow her to return. It wasn't the school that nearly killed me, corrected Harry softly, but Lord Voldemort. I just happened to be at Hogwarts at the time. And I know he would have never, ever let her go if Holly hadn't forced him into it, and even then he didn't want her to go, as if we had a choice in the matter. Dylan did have a choice, interrupted Harry quietly. Harry finished the biscuit and reached for a slice of apple. What? Of course he didn't, corrected Laurel. Not really. Not after what Holly said to his parents. I told Dylan we could modify his parents' memories so that they would never remember what happened over the summer, just as we did Megan's, Harry interrupted forcefully. And I told him that whatever school Holly attended, it would be his decision, not Holly's. I also told Holly that there was no way I would take her to Hogwarts without her father's consent freely given. Laurel took a sip of tea while she considered Harry's words. So why, she asked finally after she put down her cup, why is Holly still at Hogwarts? Harry finished the apple slice and picked up the cup of tea and took a sip before speaking. You asked me earlier how safe Hogwarts was, he began, avoiding her last question. No school can be totally safe. Accidents do happen. In that sense, Hogwarts is about as safe as any school, he continued. When accidents happen at Hogwarts, however, they can be real doozies. But what happened at Hogwarts last year was no accident. Oh? Laurel took a nibble on the biscuit while she listened. Harry took another sip of tea, collecting his thoughts before continuing. It was because of a cursed object that had been hidden at the school a long time ago. Its intended target was me, he confessed. My son Albus accidentally touched the object, and then Holly. Together, the two managed to break the curse. We made a thorough search of the school and grounds since, and can find no other such object. I told all this to Dylan, he added. Harry took another sip. I can't tell you why he changed his mind, he concluded lamely. Harry had his suspicions, of course, but that remained between him and Dylan. But I'm glad he did. Oh, said Laurel. She was thoughtful as she finished her biscuit. Thank you for telling me, she finally said. I hope that helps, said Harry. Is there anything else? No, I guess not, replied Laurel. She suspected more specific details would not be forthcoming from Mr. Potter, so there was no point in asking. That's good, said Mr. Potter. There is one other thing, though, he added, setting the teacup back in the saucer. Yes? I've a favor to ask. Really? What's that? Holly's clothes. Her clothes? Yes. I take it you and Holly didn't have a chance to go shopping this summer. No, we didn't. Holly had been grounded the whole time. Well, Jenny informs me that Holly seems to have outgrown the things she's wearing. Her clothes all fit rather tight on her. It would be no problem for us to get her replacements, Harry continued. But to be honest, I doubt Holly would wear them. She wouldn't? Why? This is difficult to explain, said Harry uncomfortably, not knowing where to begin or what to say. I'm not a psychologist, but one doesn't just walk away from a near-death experience without getting some sort of scars, either emotional or physical. He pushed up his hair, clearly revealing the small zigzaggy scar on his forehead. I got this the first time Lord Voldemort tried to kill me, he said quietly. I used to have nightmares all the time, scary ones. I still do, he confessed softly, but not as often. And Holly? Well, Holly feels much better, much safer wearing clothing acquired by you and Dylan. House robes are a part of the school dress code, of course, but the rest of what they wear underneath is up to the students. Do you think you could get Holly some more clothes in a larger size, tops, pants, socks, sweaters, and the like? I would be happy to deliver them to her. Or, if you wish, you could send the clothes to the Smiths to forward to her. Yes, replied Laurel thoughtfully. I think I could do that. The Smiths were parents of Holly's best friend, Becky. They weren't wizards and, unlike Harry, had a postal address. All the mail from the Wycliffes to Holly went by post to the Smiths, and the Smiths forwarded it by owl on to Holly at Hogwarts. Any of Holly's letters to them did the same thing in reverse. That way no owl would ever arrive unexpectedly at the Wycliffe residence. Thank you, said Harry quietly. I know it would mean a lot to Holly and make her stay at Hogwarts much more comfortable. Harry placed his cup and saucer down and stood up. I should probably be going now, he told Laurel politely. Thank you so much for the tea. It was kind of you to invite me. Yes, of course, said Laurel, standing up also. I'm glad you could come. She walked Harry to the door. Thank you again for the cookies. Do come again sometime. It would be my pleasure. Laurel shut the door quietly behind Harry Potter. Then she fetched her purse and car keys. She had some shopping to do. Blast! Muttered Holly as the concoction she was stirring suddenly turned all white and started to bubble and pop. That wasn't what the potion was supposed to do. It should have been a relatively simple potion designed to remove the ache of growing pains, but this was her fourth attempt to mix this particular potion, and she still hadn't gotten it right. Hey, said Mark consolingly. That's what I'm supposed to say, not you. Potions was not his forte, and his mixtures were known for turning the wrong color. This time, however, his potion mixture still looked promising, and might even turn out right. They were both in the Hufflepuff Potions mixing room, trying to make potions for the contest. Holly sighed. She dumped her potion in the garbage and resolutely started scrubbing her cauldron for another try. She was having a hard time getting back to classes as usual after a weekend with Meg. Most of the students gave Holly a cheerful welcome when she returned to the Great Hall for breakfast Monday morning. All, that is, but the Slytherins, who regarded her with their usual disdain and a bit of jealousy. Meg's successful return made the front page news in the Prophet, picture of Meg withheld because she was a muggle. The article vaguely stated Meg had been found at Hogwarts, but everyone at school knew who had done the finding. It went on to inform readers that an investigation was ongoing to determine the identity of the wizard who initially transformed Meg. Scorpius Malfoy had sneered at Holly and asked her if she was sorry the headmistress had refused permission for reporters to come on campus to interview her. As usual, Holly ignored them. Actually, she was glad to not talk to the reporters about her experience with Meg. It was too personal. At the oddest moments, Holly still experienced moments of fear and terror left over from merging with Meg. Madame Pomfrey assured Holly that such emotional residue was normal and would diminish with time. It was nothing to worry about. But still, it was annoying. Holly found it difficult to concentrate when the slightest sound could make her jump. Anthony Richards, whose big brother Tom was a Slytherin prefect, set off an exploding snap right under Holly's chair as they were leaving Charms class. Holly jumped. She crashed into Becky, and both hers and Becky's things scattered onto the floor with a loud clatter, much to the delight of the Slytherins. Holly had known Anthony was up to something, just not what. I took Professor Lovegood's advice and read up on empaths, he laughed, referring to something the professor had suggested the previous year. We were all wondering how far you would jump, added Martina Goyle with a satisfied smile. Her stubby, fat brown braids stuck out on either side of her ears, giving her a comical look. No one ever laughed at Goyle, though. They didn't even smile. Goyle was known to accidentally step on feet of smiling students with her heavy shoes, often sending the unlucky students to the infirmary. Oh, lay off her, said Mark, while helping the two pick up their things. You're just jealous. Yeah. Maybe you should do some reading up on insects instead, said Susan defensively. You had that grasshopper all week. You should have noticed something was wrong. It's not like grasshoppers usually come in pink and brown. You're just lucky we found it and took it off the train, sputtered Malfoy, his blue eyes flashing. Yeah, added Goyle righteously. We could have just left it there. Took it off the train, snorted Mark. One of you probably brought it on in the first place, he accused. And why would we have anything to do with a muggle? Asked Anthony coldly. Stop it, all of you, cut in Holly. She was blocking, but she still didn't like all the angry emotions surrounding her. They didn't do it. They didn't think it was anything but a grasshopper. "Butt out," retorted Anthony angrily to Holly, his brown eyes flashing. "I don't need your help, Potter." With that, he and his Slytherin friends stalked off. Holly sighed. Anthony had gotten her name wrong again. It was deliberate. There was no point in correcting him. Anthony hadn't liked her last year and still didn't from the sound of things. He thought her relationship to Harry Potter got her preferential treatment at school, and Holly doubted anything would ever convince him otherwise. This year, he seemed to have decided to rub that relationship in whenever possible. Saturday morning owl post brought Holly several packages. Holly received them with surprise. "I wonder whom they could be from," she inquired, pulling open the accompanying message from the first package. "Probably some well-wisher," said Becky. Holly had gotten several congratulatory letters throughout the week. The prophet hadn't mentioned any names, but Stan Shunpike had written her a brief note saying he knew if anyone had found that child, it had to be Holly. Other letters had come in merely addressed to the Potter cousin or the Hufflepuff Potter. Holly decided that Stan must have done a lot of talking while in the taxi. He seemed to like the Potter connection. Cousin Harry had written a brief note, too. He had been following the Muggle news, which reported Megan was doing fine. The little girl had instantly fallen in love with a new kitten someone had sent. The kitten slept with Meg every night and helped to chase away the demons of her experience. "Look," said Holly excitedly, reading the message that came with the packages. "It's from my parents. It says they're proud of me. I didn't think they even knew." Holly eagerly tore open the first package and found a stack of neatly folded clothes. "Clothes," breathed Holly lovingly. "Yes. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you," she said enthusiastically, gathering up the packages. "I think I'll go upstairs and try them out right away." Holly would never have admitted it out loud, but her clothes had been getting rather uncomfortably tight lately. Holly raced out of the great hall and started up the stairs. "Potter!" called out a voice loudly. There were no Potters nearby. Holly stopped and turned. The voice was that of Slytherin Prefect Tom Richards. He was clearly talking to Holly. "What's this? Gifts from your admirers now, Potter?" "It's Wycliffe," corrected Holly. "I should think you had my name right by now, sir," she added. He was a prefect, and she couldn't just ignore him. "Really?" Tom Richards was tall and slender, with sandy-colored hair like Anthony. He had been coming down the stairs with a book in hand. He walked on down to her with an angry expression on his face. He always seemed angry when he was around Holly. His emotions felt pretty nasty, too. "I thought you had your name changed, given the way all those letters you have been receiving were addressed," he said snidely. Holly wondered how he had known the way her letters were addressed. "No wonder the prophet didn't mention you by name," Tom continued coldly. "They probably weren't sure which one to use. You know," he added insincerely, "I'm actually sorry you didn't get to do that interview. That could have cleared up the confusion over your name. Oh well, better luck next time, if there is a next time. After all, there's not likely to be another transfigured Muggle to find. It's not as if you had any actual wizard skill for them to report on. You were just doing what any empath could do." "Tom!" called out a voice from behind Holly. "Did you find it?" It was Paige Crowley, Tom's girlfriend. Paige stood in a corridor entrance some distance away. Richards looked down at the potions book in his hand. "Yes," he called out. "Well, bring it on over," she said. Today she wore something that shimmered with glittering gold and green colors under her house robes. Her long, straight black hair hung over one shoulder, neatly tied with 4 green and gold ribbons. "I'm waiting." Tom gave Holly one last venomous look before leaving to join Paige. Like Anthony, there seemed to be no pleasing Tom. Tom had gotten into a bit of trouble last year and no doubt blamed it all on Holly and the Potters. It was probably only due to Cousin Harry that Tom hadn't been expelled, but Holly suspected that would only make Tom more resentful if he knew. "I can't see why you bother with that Muggle-loving little mudblood," Paige said to Tom rather loudly as they walked away, heading off towards the dungeons. When Paige moved, it reminded Holly of a slithering snake. Holly knew Paige didn't particularly like her either, but at least Paige didn't go out of her way to be antagonistic. Holly watched them leave and then continued hurriedly up the stairs. She couldn't wait to try on the new clothes. Those Slytherins, muttered Holly in disgust, taking a sip of tea. She was at Hagrid's hut with her friends, Becky and Mark, along with her cousins James, Albus, and Rose. Hagrid had invited them all over for tea after Quidditch practice. The Hufflepuffs had staged their practice at the stadium that day, while the Gryffindors had used the area above Cuddles' old pen. Cuddles was Hagrid's pet spitting monitor lizard last year. Hagrid had found a new home for Cuddles in the spring when it had gotten too big for the headmistress. Cuddles' pen was smaller than a normal Quidditch playing pitch, but remote. The Gryffindors had tired of the Slytherins watching the tryouts only to jeer and gauge the competition. None of the Slytherins would ever consider hanging out around Hagrid's place, so the Gryffindors could practice in private and peace. The school year has barely begun, continued Holly. I haven't done a thing to them, and already they feel annoyed at me. It's because of that article in the Prophet, replied Rose, unperturbed. She took a sip from her mug of what passed as tea in Hagrid's hut. They're probably envious, she continued. Huh? Why? The Slytherins are ambitious, Rose reminded Holly. A prominent feature in the news could go a long way towards furthering one's ambition, she explained. Of course, she added, they would have preferred to have their name included too, which is probably why they expect you to be upset yours wasn't mentioned. Speaking of articles, said Holly, what is it about doing an interview for the Prophet? That's twice Richards has implied I should be disappointed I didn't get to do an interview for the Prophet, and I don't even know what they're talking about, she complained. Hagrid's huge boarhound Fang pushed himself under the table, stepping on feet along the way. He stuck his nose out on the other side and plopped his head heavily onto Holly's lap, seeking attention. She rubbed underneath his ears absently while they talked. That's right, said Becky. She extracted her feet from under Fang and put her mug back on the table untouched. As usual, the tea smelled mostly like muddy water. You wouldn't know about that. Right after you found Meg, the Prophet contacted the school and requested to do an interview with you. Of course you were with Meg and couldn't be bothered, added Mark, putting down his mug of tea too. He pushed Fang's tail off his lap and then reached casually over and grabbed one of the hearty biscuits Hagrid had placed out on a plate for them. So they asked to do one with you right after Meg left, but the headmistress said no. Mark put the biscuit in his pocket when Hagrid wasn't looking. Hagrid's biscuits were as hard as rocks, but made excellent air purifiers when there were accidents in the potions room. But you should have known about that, said Albus. I mean, you went up to see the headmistress on Sunday. I thought that was why. Holly was silent. She'd gone up there to get permission to see Meg's return. Mark, Becky, and the Hufflepuffs knew that, of course, but it wasn't common knowledge outside of her house that she had left the campus. Holly may not have known, because it was probably Dad that told them no for her, said James slowly. Dad kind of has this thing about reporters, he added. What do you mean? Well, last year when Lawrence and I went to Hogsmeade, I met this really nice lady. She said her grandson was going to Hogwarts and was wanting to join the Quidditch team. She was really worried about how safe it was and wanted to know more. I didn't think anything of it, and was telling her about some of my experience on the team to assure her that the game was perfectly safe, when who should walk up but Dad? I've never seen him so angry. He pulled the lady aside, talked to her for a while, and she left. Then he came over and told me I was to never ever talk about anything to strangers, especially outside of Hogwarts. James put down his mug and grabbed a biscuit. Then he continued, Turns out the lady was a reporter from the Prophet and didn't even have a grandson. How did your dad know she was there? Asked Becky, grabbing her own biscuit. Fang decided to sit up while still under the table. His massive head and shoulders lifted the table, causing it to teeter precariously. Everyone grabbed their mugs of tea quickly before they fell off and spilled. Beats me, replied James, pushing Fang off his legs. Then he pushed Fang's shoulders down, forcing him into a crouch so the table would stop rocking. Somebody must have seen us talking and told him. Dad has friends everywhere. Why don't I know about this? Asked Albus, returning his mug back to the table. There wasn't much to tell, said James morosely while returning his own mug to the table. There was never any news article in the Prophet, and I haven't seen the lady since. It sure ruined my trip to Hogsmeade, though. Don't be too hard on your dad, said Hagrid consolingly. He stood up and headed for the kettle hanging over the smoky fire. He's just trying to protect you. More tea, anyone? Everyone shook their heads politely. The Daily Prophet hasn't always been that accurate," he continued, pouring himself a second mug of tea, "and I don't expect your dad has had a very good experience with it. After all," Hagrid added, sitting down again, "it practically called him nutters during his 5th year, a hero the next, and then accused him of having something to do with Dumbledore's death, putting him on the most wanted list. I guess he just figures it's better to keep out of the limelight altogether." Their conversation was interrupted by a rumbling that came from a covered slatted wood box next to the fireplace. "What's that?" inquired Becky, putting down her mug again. "That is my new pet," said Hagrid proudly. "Want to see it?" Yes, I guess so," said Albus uncertainly. Hagrid's idea of a pet last year was not very pet-like. Hagrid started to move the cover, and immediately a huge blur of mustard yellow colored something shot out of the box and headed straight for the opposite door. Fang stood up excitedly, toppling the table in the process, scattering biscuits, mug, and tea everywhere. He chased the creature around the room, threatening to knock over anyone in his way. The creature let out ear-piercing screeches as it ran, toppling furniture and bags in its path. Holly and the rest of the students in the room scrambled to keep out of the way. Barking loudly, Fang finally got it cornered, his huge body blocking the creature from view. Hagrid calmly reached past Fang, grabbed the yowling, spitting mass, and tucked it securely under his arms so only its head showed. The creature turned its head and fixed its narrow yellow gold eyes on the group. "A cat," said Becky in surprise. "A kitten," corrected Hagrid with pride. "He's only a couple weeks old." "A very big kitten," observed James dryly, as the kitten in question was about the size of a basketball. "And not a very friendly one," added Mark, stating the obvious as the kitten openly glared at all of them while growling continuously. "That's because he's still new," excused Hagrid affectionately. Holly peered at the kitten closer and noted a very long tooth poking out the side of its mouth. "Is that what I think it is?" asked Rose, voicing Holly's suspicions. "Yep," said Hagrid proudly. "It's a saber-toothed tiger." "I thought they were extinct," said Holly. "That's what muggles say about dragons, too," replied Hagrid. "You just have to know where to look." "How did you come to get a saber-toothed tiger?" inquired James, venturing closer to look at the yellow tufted hair coming out of the kitten's ears. The ears flattened threateningly when he neared. "Well," replied Hagrid, "I was thinking about raising a kraken, but then I read how they like water really deep, and I didn't think they'd be too happy here. So then I was thinking about getting a chimera. They're real cute, you know, but McGonagall said I couldn't get anything that spit stuff this year, and they spit fire." At that moment the kitten opened its mouth and hissed loudly. Immediately the room filled with a foul, noxious odor. Everyone backed away from the kitten as far as possible. "Whew," said Becky, fanning her face. "That's worse than a skunk." "Well, it's not spit," concluded Mark, "but I'd hate to be downwind of this cat when he's mad." "She," corrected Hagrid affectionately. "'Tain't nothing but a bit of bad breath," he added lovingly. "A proper diet should fix that right away." Holly opened up a window to let some air in, and the kitten immediately started struggling to get loose. "I didn't know what to do for a pet," continued Hagrid with his story while holding more tightly onto the kitten, "and then I heard this one's mum was killed by a giant and it had nobody to care for it, so I volunteered. I've never raised a cat before, and I wasn't sure it would work, but look at her. It's a match made in heaven," he said jubilantly. "Isn't she beautiful?" Hagrid tenderly put the kitten back in the box and quickly placed the lid over it. The whole box seemed to bounce about as the kitten screeched and tried to get out. One mustard yellow paw reached through a crack in the box and bared its claws, daring anyone to come closer. "What's her name?" inquired Holly, keeping a safe distance away from the box. "Well," said Hagrid, brushing off his hands, sending a cloud of dust and cat hair floating up in the air, "she's such a pretty little thing that she needs a special name." "Spitfire," suggested Albus hopefully. "Rocket," suggested Mark. "Dinah, for dynamite." "Vixen?" Hagrid shook his head at all of these suggestions. "Nope," he said. "She's too sweet for names like that. I think I'll call her Lulu." Lulu continued to growl, hiss, and rattle her box throughout the rest of their visit. Fang kept close watch over Lulu, nearly getting scratched several times when Lulu shot a clawed paw out between the slats. You know, said James as they walked back to the dorms, I thought I'd never say this, but I think I liked Cuddles better. Yeah, agreed Albus. He was cute when he was little and fairly harmless. You only had to dodge that spit, not a wicked set of teeth and claws. You get along with cats pretty well, said Rose to Holly. Don't you think you could? No way, said Holly emphatically. I may be able to feel what it feels, but I can't control it. That cat was pure mean. If I dropped my block around her, I would do nothing but yell and spit at everyone. At least your breath would smell better, said Becky, and everyone laughed. Are you done? Becky asked impatiently. Almost, replied Holly. She finished straining her mixture and pouring it into a flask for submission. Then she carefully rolled the parchment containing the ingredients and directions and attached it to the flask. This particular entry did not come from the boorish book, so she had to include a source as well. Holly thought about that a moment before writing the name Professor Luna Lovegood. Actually, Holly had found the directions scrawled in the margins of an ancient Defense Against the Dark Arts book titled Defensive Magical Theory. No title or explanation had been included, but as the resulting mixture seemed to be liquid, Holly had gone to Professor Lovegood for further explanation. She peered at the ingredients through her oversized glasses and then smiled. Ah, yes, she said in her dreamy voice. Essence of Murtlap. It was quite popular in my 4th year at Hogwarts. What's it for? Persisted Holly. Is it a potion? A potion? A frown creased Professor Lovegood's usually serene expression. No, Holly's face fell. But it is medicinal. You might make up a batch and submit it anyway, just in case they'll accept it. Holly perked up immediately at the suggestion. What's it for? Asked Holly again. She had to include that information with her entry. It was very good at relieving the pain of minor cuts and scratches, if I recall, replied Professor Lovegood. Her serene expression and voice hid a sudden eruption of darker emotions. That was most irregular. Professor Lovegood's emotions were usually so quiet that Holly never bothered to block when alone with her. Holly had the idea that Professor Lovegood was reliving a not-so-pleasant experience somehow connected to Essence of Murtlap. Holly was curious how minor cuts and scratches could bring about such strong emotions, but it seemed intrusive somehow. Besides, she didn't like reminding people how much emotion she could sense behind their words. The knowledge often made others uncomfortable. Holly thought quickly. Professor Lovegood had attended Hogwarts with Cousin Harry. Perhaps she could ask. Then again, if it brought such strong emotions from Professor Lovegood, how would Cousin Harry feel? Should I mention this to Cousin Harry? Asked Holly uncertainly. I wouldn't, came the quiet response. Professor Lovegood's emotions were again under control. I believe Harry spent a lot of time in detention writing lines that year, she added cryptically. Holly pondered how writing lines could somehow be connected with Essence of Murtlap as she placed her thumbprint on the flask. There were others who probably knew what Professor Lovegood meant, but Holly doubted anyone who knew would tell her. People seemed very reluctant to talk about the days before Lord Voldemort died, especially the uncomfortable things. It wasn't that important anyway. Holly put the flask in the submissions vault. Once inside, it could not be removed until the end of the contest. Holly added Essence of Murtlap to the Hufflepuff list of completed potions, and then joined Becky outside the potions mixing room.